Today's lecture is going to be on the famed artist Vincent van Gogh. And we all know who Vincent van Gogh is. He's one of the most famous artists that we know of. He's one of the most admired and appreciated. This is an artist who we know a lot about his biography, particularly the fact that during his lifetime, he cut his ear off. And he is also an artist that famously committed suicide. However, during his lifetime, it seemed to be really tragic because he wasn't appreciated, he wasn't understood as an artist, and he was pushing on a lot of boundaries that today we really embrace in these modern artists. During his lifetime, he only sold one painting, Red Vineyards, sold it for 400 francs, which translates to about $80. However, today when we see his paintings at auction, they sell for millions. Take Sunflowers, for instance. In 1987, this painting went up for sale at Christie's auction house, and it almost made $40 million. It was about $39.6 million was the take. And notice how Vincent signs his name on his paintings. When we look at the flower pot, he just writes his first name, Vincent. In a letter to his brother, he states that, quote, "I'm never going to amount to anything as an artist. People aren't going to remember my last name, so I'm just going to use my first." When we look at other artists such as Claude Monet, he signs his full name. Picasso, in this instance, uses his initials and last name. But with Vincent, as we see again here in the lower right-hand side, he just uses his first name. Now, with Irises, this is a painting that also sells at auction in 1987, gaining over $50 million. But this isn't even his most expensive work. That one sells in 1990. Dr. Gachet sells for over $83 million. And this maintains the number one selling painting at auction from 1990 all the way to 2005. And even today, Dr. Gachet is in the top 10 of most amounts of money paid for a painting at auction. But most of us don't have millions of dollars to spend on a painting, so some just go out and steal them. In 2002, thieves broke into the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam and stole two paintings. They stole this one, the Reformed Church at Nuenen, and they stole this work, the View of the Sea at Scheveningen. Now, the thieves were caught, they were convicted, they're still in jail today. The paintings, they had not been recovered until the fall of 2017, when they were discovered in a mafia kingpin's home. What's great about this painting itself is that Van Gogh paints this in plein air, meaning that he painted it literally on the bluff overlooking this scene rather than in a studio. And you can see from the clouds filling up the sky and the choppy waves that there's this storm coming in. The painting was x-rayed in 1990, and what was found was sand particles embedded into the paint. So this painting is so cool because it serves as a time capsule or a remembrance of that day with the sand literally part of the painting. In 2003, thieves broke into the Whiteworth Gallery in Manchester, England, and stole three paintings, including one of them which was by Van Gogh, which is this one called The Fortification of Paris. The thieves, they were kind enough to leave a note saying that they didn't intend to steal the art, but they just wanted to highlight the poor security in the gallery. All three paintings were recovered the next day, rolled up in a public restroom. However, the Van Gogh painting you can see in the upper right-hand corner was torn and damaged. So here's some facts about Van Gogh. First of all, he was born in 1853, but is not like a painter like we would see of Picasso, who was always painting throughout his life. Van Gogh doesn't start painting until the age of 27, and he doesn't really have any formal training. He does go to art school, but very quickly drops out. His career is short. It's only going to last 10 years as he commits suicide in 1890. However, during the time that he's active, he produces over 1,700 works of art. Some people believe that he produced over 2,000. Now, 438 of those were produced during the last 2 years of his life, from the summer of 1888 to the summer of 1890. And if you do the math, he's producing a painting every 40 hours. And these are not little small studies or anything like that. These are some of his most noted works. Works such as sunflowers and irises, the Night Cafe, Wheat Field with Crows, and Starry Night. Starry Night is one of the most famous paintings of all time, and it's just so many students' favorite work. That tattoo will have you under the needles for about 20 to 25 hours. This one much less, about 15 hours. And Van Gogh's paintings cross so many different cultures. Now with this cake here, when we look at the frosting, we can see how thick it is. And I wanted to tell you how Van Gogh uses paint about in this thickness when he completes his work. Van Gogh is noted for using the technique of impasto, which means thickly applied paint. And he would take this undiluted paint right from the tubes to apply it to the canvas. And so when you see a Van Gogh painting in person, it's not flat, it's not glass like so many other paintings are. These paintings there's a thickness, a three-dimensionality to them. And when a lot of these paintings were x-rayed in 1990, which was the time of the 100th year anniversary of Van Gogh's death, a lot of museums were doing special exhibitions and such. So these works were x-rayed, and we found that the oil paint underneath was still wet 100 years after this gentleman's death. Now, Vincent van Gogh was a really smart person. He studied both Greek and Latin. He was conversant in 4 languages: French, German, English, and of course his native Dutch. Before he was a painter, he was a preacher, just like his father was. And he was nicknamed the Christ of the coal mines. He would preach to the poor coal mining towns of Belgium. And even when offered a bed to sleep in, this is a person who would say, "No, thank you. I'm going to sleep on the floor instead." And we'll talk about his family for just a little bit here. We have his father, Theodorus, who was a Baptist preacher. His mother, Anna Cornelia. And they're going to have a total of 6 children. There's Vincent, the eldest. We also have his sister Anna. We have his brother Theo, and Theo is so incredibly important to our story because this is the person who financially supports Vincent during the 10 years that he is an artist. Theo is an art dealer of some fame in Paris, and he's also the one that extends the family line. None of the other Van Gogh children have any children of their own, but Theo does. We also have Sister Elizabeth, Wilhelmina, and unfortunately Wilhelmina suffers from a lot of the same mental disorders that Vincent does, and she spends most of her life in an asylum. And the final brother is Cornelius. And what's unique about the Van Gogh family is that all the brothers die very, very young. They die around the age of 30. However, all the women in the family die in their mid to late 70s. As I mentioned, Theo and Vincent are very close, and they are buried next to one of each other at the cemetery at Auvers, about 18 miles outside of Paris. And a lot of what we know about the brothers, and particularly about Vincent, come from the letters that Vincent wrote to his brother Theo. There's 776 of them you can buy in a 3-volume set, or you can buy, in the case of the book at the right, just the best letters. You can also go to vangoghletters.org, which has scans of the actual letters, and it also will translate it for you. When we look at a painting such as the Night Cafe, we can see that the color distribution is thought of beforehand by reading these letters. Vincent writes to his brother, "I have tried to express the terrible passions of humanity by means of red and green. The room is blood red and dark yellow with a green billiard table in the middle. There are 4 lemon yellow lamps with a glow of orange and red. Everywhere there is clash and contrast." The idea that Vincent knows that he's using a particular color scheme, a complementary scheme, that causes the viewer uneasiness or to be unsettled because we're using a cool color with a warm color, and when we have those two next to each other, it affects our optic nerve and it makes us feel that uneasy feeling. In fact, when you watch a lot of horror movies, red and green is a predominant color in them. In 1885, we get Van Gogh's very first masterpiece called The Potato Eaters, and it looks unlike any other Van Gogh painting that we're familiar with because primarily it's lacking color. The idea that this painting is dark, it's sad, there's a heavy subject matter, it looks very monochromatic, and Vincent is really among the first people to utilize the poor or the working class as a subject matter for his paintings. So when we look at the entire range of Van Gogh's career, he continually paints people who are peasants. In fact, in his self-portrait, Vincent presents himself to you as a peasant. Now, a lot of other artists use self-portraits to demonstrate their skill, their mastery. In the case of Albrecht Dürer, he presents himself to you as Christ. And this is also, we're just ending a time where painting was very restrictive because it was so expensive. So the paintings would only have leaders of the government or leaders of the military. It would have leaders of the church, or it would have very wealthy families. We just talked about the Impressionists, and the Impressionists were really the first people to paint modern life, the idea that we're painting middle to upper middle class individuals. But Vincent concentrates on the poor, and he sends this painting off to his brother Theo in Paris to see if he'll be able to sell it for him, and Theo responds back with, "No, this painting will never sell here." And the reason that is because this is the time where we have artists such as Claude Monet and Camille Pissarro, Edgar Degas and Mary Cassatt, Berthe Morisot and Renoir, all active. The Impressionists, 10 to 15 years after their birth, have been now finally embraced by the populace. Over in Amsterdam, Vincent is painting images like this, and he hears about the Impressionists from his brother, and he says that he wants to come to Paris. But he doesn't have any money, but his brother is there. So they have letters that go back and forth with Vincent trying to be able to stay with his brother, and his brother just saying, "No, I don't want you to stay with me." The final letter, about 40 letters in, from Vincent, tells his brother he's at the train station and he needs to come pick him up. And it's miraculous how fast Vincent's style changes. He stays in Paris for 2 years, from 1886 to 1888, and he meets with the Impressionists. He becomes friends with them. This painting is somewhat in their style, but Vincent's idea of painting is totally different than Impressionism. With Impressionism, the idea is to capture optical color, painting in front of the objects, and Vincent, while he does do some of that, Vincent is more interested in the expressive use of color. The idea that he's going to be painting almost all day long. You know, when the sun goes down, Impressionists stop painting and they hang out in cafes and bistros, where Vincent paints constantly. And he can even make, in this image, a factory town look like someplace you'd like to visit. And Vincent is a person who hates industrialization. Van Gogh is going to be noted as a post-impressionist by the art historian Roger Fry. He groups these people separately because he says that their means of painting are different, that Paul Cézanne is interested in the spatial planes and changing those around. Paul Gauguin, interested in capturing images of primitivism, and again, expressive uses of color are seen in his paintings. And the same with Vincent. Now, during the late 1800s, one of the cool things that we see happening is that we have an increase in appreciation for Japanese art, particularly Japanese woodcuts that were done during the 1700s. And so artists would grab onto these woodcuts and then produce a painting in the woodcuts style. So here we have at the left a true Japanese woodcut print, and then at the right we have Vincent's oil painting. We can see how quickly, again, we've got Vincent capturing a totally different style of art. And one of my favorites is this work here. The idea that we haven't found the print that this is based on yet, which can mean that we just haven't found the print yet, but it can also mean that this is a unique image from Vincent van Gogh. The idea that, you know, Vincent's style has changed again to this wonderful Japanese type of art. And he does want to go to Japan, but his brother doesn't have enough money to send him. So in 1888, he decides it's time to leave Paris and move to the south of France, in fact, the southeast, to the city of Arles. And Arles is located between Nice and Monaco toward Italy. The painting itself is called the Yellow House, and this is where Vincent lived. Unfortunately, the Yellow House does not exist anymore. It was destroyed by a bomb during World War II. But if you were to go to Arles today, and the rest of the block looks nearly exactly the same as it does in this painting. In fact, this painting seems to have been sketched out or drawn out at a cafe along the sidewalk across the street. This is an image of Vincent's bedroom in the Yellow House. And while here, he wants to create an artist colony. And the person he wants to lead this artist colony is Paul Gauguin. And Paul Gauguin is not a very good person. This is a gentleman who has left his wife, left his job, left his 5 kids to become a painter. Sadly, even in death, he is besting Van Gogh. His paintings sell for much, much more than Van Gogh's works do. In fact, up until the fall of 2017, this was the most expensive painting ever sold at auction at $300 million. During the fall of 2017, a Leonardo da Vinci painting sold for $400 million. This was also the roommate from hell. The idea that Gauguin would stare over Vincent's shoulder, he would be telling Vincent that he's painting too quickly, and Van Gogh yelling back, "You're just looking too quickly." But it's because of Gauguin that we have the ear-cutting story. The idea that they had had a fight one day and they each go storming off in their own direction. Later that night, Gauguin says, "I'm walking down an alleyway in Arles and I turn because I hear someone following me. It's Vincent and he's brandishing a razor. And I'm able to stare him down with a look and I tell him to go home. And when he goes home, that's when he severs his ear." And we always just say, "Oh yeah, he cut his ear off." He didn't cut his entire ear off, only the lower portion. Later that night, he visits a brothel, and he gives to a prostitute a handkerchief that is soaked in blood. And he says, "Guard this object carefully." And when he turns and leaves, and when she opens it up, he has given her the severed portion of his ear. And so we look at that and we go, what made him do that? What made him go crazy? Well, first of all, he was plagued by not only syphilis, but other venereal diseases. We believe now that he had Meniere's disease, which is an inner ear disorder, causing both headaches and vertigo. He had been diagnosed with epilepsy. He had gotten lead poisoning. He drank turpentine and absinthe. And he also heard voices saying that people were out to kill him, to poison him. And so it was at this time where his neighbors suggested he go get some help, and he does. About 12 miles up the road from Arles is the asylum at St. Remy. And this is where he admitted himself. He was never locked away. And again, this is another misnomer that we hear about Van Gogh, is that he was locked away in an asylum, and he just wasn't. He could literally come and go as he pleased. His brother Theo is paying the bill. Not only did he pay for this room here, he paid for the room next door to serve as Vincent's art studio. And St. Remy is an absolute beautiful place. It was at one point a nun's convent, but then it turned into an asylum, and today it's very much a tourist attraction. And you can see from this image, taken in about 2012, that it looks very much the way it did in the late 1880s. But while he was staying at the asylum at St. Remy, Vincent starts getting troubling letters from his brother, saying that he had met this woman named Joanna, and he had fallen in love. They had gotten married, and she gave birth to a child, which they named Vincent van Gogh, which is so unique because Vincent the artist isn't the first Vincent van Gogh in the family. 1 year to the day before Vincent the artist is born, his mother had given birth to a child that unfortunately passed away. And so Vincent the artist is looked at really in psychology as this replacement child. There was a tremendous distance between him and his mother, and he always sought out her love, and he just never received it. That's one of the reasons we think he painted so many landscape paintings, is because that his mother loved landscapes. This continued on with his attraction to older women that were usually in some type of distress. Besides his mother, he had fallen in love with his cousin Kate. He had asked her to marry him, and she turned him down. He fell in love with a prostitute that had syphilis. She was an alcoholic. She had a 4-year-old. She was pregnant with another man's baby. Vincent asked her to marry him. She turned him down as well. Now, a few paintings also that I want to show you that are unique to Vincent's collection is this work here, which is used as the front cover of David Sedaris's book. This painting here was a painting taken by the Nazis during the degenerate art Act of 1937, taken to Switzerland and sold at auction, gaining $40,000, those funds benefiting the Third Reich. Another painting of irises, and Vincent says irises came to him in dreams. And then we have this work here, and this is Wheatfield with Crows. This is considered Vincent's suicide painting, but it is one of 3 that he was working on. He sends these 3 paintings off to his brother with a note saying that these paintings will express to you what I cannot say in words. And we look at this painting, and it's very dark and dismal. It's sad, it's lonely. There's a certain theme of Halloween to this painting. And what happens to Vincent during this time is he goes out to paint, allegedly another canvas, but he brings a revolver with him, allegedly to frighten off birds. And he puts it up to his chest and he shoots himself. He misses his heart, the bullet lodging near his spine, so the doctors are not going to be able to remove it. And what happens is he starts to bleed to death. He makes his way back to the home he's staying at, which is actually the home of Dr. Gachet. He's not living at the asylum anymore. He's living up in Auvers, which is 18 miles to the northeast of Paris. And he collapses into his bed. When he doesn't show up for dinner, Dr. Gachet and his family go looking for him. They find the track of blood, and they immediately, upon finding Vincent, they summon Theo from Paris. And Theo makes his way out to Auvers. He sits with Vincent throughout the night, the 2 brothers talking, and Vincent's going to die in his brother's arms at 1 o'clock in the morning, July 29th of 1890. Now, Vincent's funeral is held outside the churchyard because it's a suicide. Only 10 individuals go, including Dr. Gachet, Theo, the priest, the son of Camille Pissarro, the Impressionist painter, and a few others. As his coffin is lowered into the ground, sunflowers are thrown on top of it. It is later moved, I believe it's around 1915, that it's moved inside the cemetery next to his brothers. Now, in 2012, this book comes out. It's a rather large book, about 950 pages in length, by Nafa and Smith. They are the authors, and they are wonderful researchers. They're not necessarily art historians, but they have written a couple books on art history, particularly this one and one by Pollock, one for Pollock. And they say that the end of Vincent's life is a little bit different, that instead of committing suicide, he was actually murdered or accidentally shot by this teenager. During the late 1800s in Paris, one of the biggest shows around was Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, and the idea of Annie Oakley and American gunslinging was very, very popular. So there was this group of teenagers that had been harassing Vincent while he was out painting. One of them, named Rene Sectran, had a revolver, and he would spin it around, and it accidentally went off and shot Vincent. And this accounts for a couple of important things. It accounts for, number one, the poor placement of the bullet. If you go out to commit suicide, you know where your heart is, and you're generally not going to miss. But it's also the fact that we've never found the revolver. So, unfortunately, it leaves us with the same ideas that Vincent is dead. Even more sad than that is his brother Theo is going to pass away within the next 6 months. He is admitted to an asylum. He has contracted syphilis, and he even tried to murder his wife and his child. It's Theo's wife that we have really to thank for documenting all of the letters between the brothers as well as all of Vincent's work. In fact, she went to the mom's house and asked the mother if she could document the paintings that Vincent sent to her, because she had some shipping manifests. And the mother said, I'm sorry, I ran out of room and I started throwing these paintings away. And when you think about, like, each painting she threw away was worth well over $1 million, it just really is heartbreaking. But it's also exciting because sometimes these paintings do find their way into our lives again. In 2015, there was this gentleman in Belgium who bought a house, and up in the attic was this painting done in the impasto style. There was a hair follicle in the paint, and when they ran DNA tests on it, they also ran DNA tests on those of the surviving members of the Van Gogh family, and it matched, and the painting sold for, I believe, $1.2 million to a museum. And so that was a wonderful find. And so hopefully there are others that are still out there. And I'll close this lecture up with a quote from Van Gogh himself. He says, "Your profession is not what you do for money. It is what you are put on earth to do. With such passion and intensity, it becomes spiritual or calling."